Magnus goes for the Sicilian, knight f3. He plays his pawn to e6. And we have, well, he was going to play d4 but then stopped in his tracks. Maybe there's something else on his mind. Is he going to play the close Sicilian with d3 or some like King's Indian attack with g3? He plays d4. Pawn takes, knight takes, and now a6. We have the Sicilian KAN on the board. This is Amruta's favorite opening. g3 played here. Now knight c3 is a normal move, or c4, but g3 played and Magnus instantly plays d5, knight b3. If you take here, queen d8, king d8, knight d2, f5, f3 is a well-known line here. So Magnus plays knight f6, takes, takes. Now one should actually applaud Magnus for knowing what the best move is after g3, because he had played d6 once against Anish Giri and had lost it. So I think he knew that d5 is the best move. We now reach a position which is an isolated queen pawn position with pawn on d5, and which could mean that the pawn is a bit weak. But modern day chess has made the top players learn how to live with an isolated pawn, and not just live but thrive with it, and that's why Magnus has opted for it. Knight comes to c3, bishop goes and defends the pawn, and now maybe bishop g5, increasing the pressure on the d5 pawn. Yes, he plays it. Magnus quickly castles. Now if you take here and take on d5, unfortunately the b2 pawn is hanging, so you need to do something about it, which is maybe the reason why Pawel can go for a very weird looking move, rook b1, and he does it. So you see now he's threatening to win a pawn, take and take on d5, so that b2 doesn't hang at the end. And Magnus now has to figure out what to do about his d pawn. It's a weak pawn, but he pushes it. But there is bishop c6, takes, and knight d4. Clearly possible to win a pawn this way. But you would be giving up your important bishop. So he goes knight e2. He's now having 1, 2, 3 attackers and also one piece attacking the defender. Magnus plays h6. And he's like, if you take, I'll take back with the bishop, bringing in one more defender. So Pawel has to now decide whether he wants to take on f6. No, he comes back on c1. His entire focus is on winning the d4 pawn. He's like, let me win this pawn and I'll be clearly better. But in the process, he has become quite passive. Magnus now goes bishop c4. You can't take on d4 just as yet because there's a pin here and that would be problematic. Bishop takes c6 has happened first. Okay, Magnus now thinking a bit. Of course you can recapture, but there was also another move, by the way, which was d3. Interesting move, but takes, knight takes. Now white is a pawn up. It's good news, because if you play, by the way, c5, not knight c6 here, which would be a mistake because of queen c7, but rather b3 is the move that lets Teclaf do okay. Queen d7, b3 played here by Pawel, and now the bishop has to move away. Oh, you don't want to give up your bishop for the knight. This would mean white is clearly better here. He goes bishop d5, and these light squares are weak. So Magnus is a pawn down, but on the other hand, he has some trump cards. Firstly, this knight on d4 is slightly weirdly placed. Knight takes d5, queen takes d5. You can see the pin here. Bishop e3, an important move to be played so as to be fine. But bishop b2, this is not the best move, because now Magnus has this very strong move, bishop c5. And the point, yes, he finds it, because now if you play, let's say, knight e2, there is bishop takes f2, classy move. Rook takes would lose here. If king takes, I can go queen f5 check and win your queen. So he goes c3, which is the natural move, and Magnus brings in his knight. He's increasing the pressure on this diagonal. He plays c4, a very nice move. Yes, the knight on d4 now is in big trouble, because if you move away, bishop f2 is just killing blow now. So, and also queen is coming into h3. But Pawel has a move up his sleeve, which is to break the pin. Yes, queen c2. Because now if you take here, I can take queen e4 and white is clearly better. Magnus has to figure out how to keep up the pressure. He's pawn down, and if the white pawn was back on g2, he would have been worse. But for the pawn being on g3, now the queen can enter here later. Rook e8, defending the knight. Rook fe1 would be a good move to attack here, but he goes rook d1, queen h3, and now maybe a good idea is to play rook d3 somehow. This is getting very intense. f3, kicking the knight away, but this pin has become so real now. Knight g5, excellent move by Magnus Carlsen. He has all sorts of threats, one of them being just move the queen back and take advantage of this pin. Pawel goes to g2. He says if you take here, I'm clearly better after king g2. But Magnus has a great move, comes back, pins it here. What a nice little move there. But very important now to play b4. That's the only defensive move. King h1, blunder. Knight e6. There's not just pin this way, it's also pinned this way. You can see Pawel Teclaf being so unhappy there. He knows that he's blundered big time. Magnus Carlsen is now winning because knight takes e6. There's queen takes d1. Rook takes d1, rook takes d1, and you lose the queen. But hey, there is a small tactic here. Knight takes e6. Queen takes d1. Can I not take your rook here on d8? Well, Magnus seems to have seen all of this. The time on the clock is just 38 seconds for Magnus, 51 seconds for Pawel. He has his hand on his head. He knows that he blundered big time there. Magnus being as cool as a cucumber there, very, very calm. Takes on e6, takes on d1, takes on d8, and now what's the move here? Well, Magnus shows the way. Rook e1, instant resignation. If you take queen e1 is a mate, otherwise f1 is hanging. Look at this bishop here controlling the diagonal. A fantastic game by Magnus Carlsen, showing first how to play with an isolated pawn, then showing the power of tactics, and also showing how he's the absolute